Cognitive issues. It was my first noticeable symptom, and it's a crazy story how I discovered it. I'm going to tell you all about it, and it also cost me my career. Hi, I'm Cliff, and this is Life with MS. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician, I'm just a random guy on YouTube with MS, and these are just my experiences. Let's get started. This week's not so fun fact, MS is more common in women than in men. And women are 2.5 times more likely to develop multiple sclerosis than men. This video is going to be useful for people that are looking for answers and to get a diagnosis, also people that are newly diagnosed and people that have been diagnosed for some time. There's going to be value for everybody here because when we share knowledge about this disease, we start winning against this disease. Cognition was only one of first of several symptoms. There's 3 more I'm going to cover, and we'll go over these. But I do have a favor to ask of you if you have MS and have been diagnosed or have had it for a while. Can you leave your first symptom or first symptoms in the comments below so for people looking for answers that have not been diagnosed can have something to relate to or compare against? I think that'd be very helpful. And also like and share this video if you find it valuable because I'm really trying to get it out there. If I had seen this video or something like it years ago, I think I would have pushed a lot harder on my first diagnosis instead of it taking 10 to 14 years. Maybe it would have taken 1 or 2. Maybe I would have seen the right specialist right away. Maybe I would have had something to compare against. But when I had my first symptoms, this was not a thing. Like sharing this type of knowledge online was just not there yet. Okay, so let's hop into the symptoms. I'm going to start with symptom number 4 because symptom number 1 is going to be cognition, cognitive issues, but it's got a really crazy story to it. And if the people watching this video are anything like me because they have MS, I usually remember the last thing first. That's just how my brain works. So that's how I've structured this video. And I want whoever's watching this that might have MS to really remember the last point in this video. Number 4, numb legs. This was one of my first symptoms. My legs started going numb. And it started in my left leg first with the toes and worked its way up my body as my stress levels at work increased. And then over to the right side, I mean, everything was numb, including the winky, which I won't say the actual medical term for because, you know, the algorithm gods might be like, oh, he's talking about winkers, whatever. Everything went numb. And so I went and saw a doctor, and my physician sent me to a spine specialist. And the spine specialist was a guy who had spent a lot of time in the military and saw a lot of parachute accidents. And so he thought it was compressed nerve in my back. So I went with that. But what I noticed as time would go on, the issues would resolve, the stuff would go away. And then when the stress got crazy in my life again, every time this numbness would start coming back. And it was a weird numbness. It would be a thermal numbness first. I couldn't feel hot or cold. Like I could feel the cold tile on my right foot, but I couldn't feel the cold tile on my left foot. And it would start my toe and work its way back. And then I couldn't feel cold water or hot water on my skin. And it was just very strange, eventually to the point where my legs, I started not being able to control them at all. My right leg would just be like a floppy noodle when I was trying to put my shoes on. And we all thought it was due to spinal compression because I like to surf. I was very active. I like to ride my bike a lot. So we racked it up to like some kind of sports injury and didn't pursue anything on a neurological side that was like whole body like MS. There's a whole story to that. I won't get into that. I'll make this video way too long. But the point is, it started with the numbness in my legs and worked its way up into a thing called the MS hug. We'll talk about that later in some other videos where it feels like someone squeezed you in the middle. I had no idea what multiple sclerosis even was, much less that I had it. But I just attributed everything to just being too aggressive with my body because I surfed in a very crazy environment. I liked big waves. I liked fast waves. And when I went on a bicycle ride, I'm not talking like, you know, around the block. I went on 100-milers. I really pushed my limits. I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine doing that now, but whatever. So numb legs. So numb legs, number 4. Number 3, back spasms from hell. And I'm not talking back spasms like slightly hurty kind of thing. I'm talking like my spine was bent like a question mark, and I'm not talking about hunched over. I mean, like here are my two legs and my spine. My spine would be like that. So my whole body was offset. And I went to go see the doctors, talked about it, and they said take muscle relaxants. There's something going on with the muscles. Probably just overworking them. I refused to take the muscle relaxants because I didn't want to be a zombie all day long, and it would take weeks for this back thing to resolve. And that's when I started thinking there's probably something else going on here other than just a spasm back. And of course, me being stupid and young thought, I'll just get back on my bike and back in the water and surf, and I'll just work it out. I'll just make it happen. Like, I will be fine. That's a dangerous mindset when I look back. Like, I pushed my MS way too far, and it did a lot of damage in my spine. So if you're having these issues, you know, my recommendation is go find answers, and you're starting here, which is fantastic. What I would tell somebody in my position back then is go get 3 opinions from 3 totally different physicians or 3 totally different specialists, because in my case, I took the opinion of one and it was wrong, and I have a lot more progression in my MS now because it took me so long to react to the disease in my body. So be proactive, but at the same time, do your research and get opinions. I don't do anything now without getting 3 opinions. Get the opinion of multiple people would be my recommendation. So yeah, number 3, the back spasms from hell. And one thing I want to add to the back spasms from hell thing that's I think is very important is that I used to put heat on it, and I didn't seem to have any effect, if not just make it worse. And then I noticed that putting ice on it really helped. But I'm not talking like a small ice pack, like literally, and I got this from a physical therapist friend at school, at university, laying on my belly and putting an ice block on my back with a towel between it so the ice doesn't burn your skin, and really putting some weight on there. And I noticed that the ice and cold would really reduce the amount of back pain, and sometimes after 30 minutes completely alleviate it, and it would be good for another couple of weeks. So the combination of cold treating it, but heat seeming to irritate it, led me to believe that there was something more than just this back spasm going on. So that's another thing to think about. And one more thing I want to add to that is when I'm having spasms, my body loves a cold saltwater pool. 30 minutes in that, and I'm feeling great. Now, the kicker is I hate cold water, but my body loves it. So I just hate getting in anything cold. I'd rather just get in a hot tub, but that is just detrimental to my MS. So like the cold saltwater pool seems to be like the cure-all for me in terms of when my body really hurts. You just kind of get in that negative buoyancy where you're just kind of floating around a little bit, taking the pressure off your body, and then the salt draws out the inflammation or something. I don't know how it all works, but I'm telling you, it works for me. It may not work for other people, but it works for me, and it's fantastic. So another thing to think of. Certainly not a cure. Number two, heat intolerance, our favorite. Super fatigue from heat, yay! And it's currently on about 95 degrees outside, which is why I'm gonna get a couple of these videos out today, because I'm not going outside. Heat intolerance. So, I noticed this back when I was 17, if you can believe it. And of course, me being 17, didn't think much of it at the time, other than the fact that that was quite unusual what was going on. I went on a bike ride with a friend in Northern California, and it was cold in the morning, got hot in the afternoon. My friend was a gamer who was probably 40 pounds overweight and never ate a healthy thing in his life. And here I am, an avid surfer and cyclist, feeling pretty good and pretty fit at the age of 17. And we went on this bike ride, and it got hot in the afternoon. I couldn't keep up with him. I was gasping for air and sweating profusely. And he was just taking off like a rocket ship. And we were on the road. We weren't even mountain biking. It was road cycling. It was relatively flat. I thought, man, there's something very strange going on there. Kind of put that in the memory banks. And then years later, when I was at university, I noticed when we would go out and train, I was a college athlete. In the morning, I would do great. In the gym, I would do terrible because I got too hot. And then in the afternoons, if it was too hot, I would do terrible. Now, what's interesting about that is I lived with my teammates I studied with my teammates. I partied with my teammates. It was a very controlled environment from that respect. Like, we all kind of did the same thing. But the thing that tore us apart when it was time to train and compete was if it was hot or cold. If it was cold, I was on fire. If it was hot, I was dead in the water. So that heat intolerance was a big thing. And that's number 2. And it still haunts me to this day. The heat intolerance is a real deal killer here in the summertime. Number 1, cognitive issues masked as ADHD. And I'm pretty sure there's probably a little bit ADHD in there as well, because I'm kind of crazy by nature, but the MS has not helped with the cognitive issues. So I promised I would tell you a story about this, that's something you may be able to implement if you think you have MS. And even if you have MS, you could probably test this. This is kind of a fun thing, if not totally depressing. I got this job at a startup. It was a project manager job, and we would have meetings in the morning, and then we'd have meetings about those meetings, and then meetings about those meetings, until we just had meetings and meetings all day long. We never really got anything done, and the company went out of business. Big surprise. What was interesting is this was around the time my legs were going numb and not going numb and going numb. There was a lot going on with my body. My MS was really starting to emerge, and I had not been diagnosed yet, and I was looking for answers. But one of the key turning points was that we would have these meetings, and then we would be done with the meetings, and my coworkers would come up to me and they would say, hey, we want to talk about X, Y, and Z we talked about in the meeting. And I would say, we didn't talk about that in the meeting. What are you guys talking about? Like, yeah, we did talk about it in the meeting. And I would insist it was just not something we had a discussion about. So after about 3 or 4 weeks of me insisting that we had not discussed certain topics in meetings, and them insisting that we had, I decided I'd be tricky and I would start recording the meetings. And then I would go back and listen to the meetings and prove to them that we had not had these discussions. And the first meeting was an hour-long meeting, and we talked about a lot of stuff. And then they came to me afterwards for another meeting about that meeting, and they said, we want to talk about X, Y, and Z. And I said, we didn't talk about X, Y, and Z. And they said, oh, yes, we did. And I said, well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to the notes. And I turned the notes on and I started listening. I was sitting there in my cubicle with my headphones on. I was listening to it, and we did talk about that stuff. And I had even made comments in the meeting about the stuff we were talking about. So I was contributing to the conversation and had absolutely no knowledge of it after the meeting was over. And so I thought, I'm losing my mind here. This is crazy. So I did that again for the next couple of weeks. And I realized this was a real problem. I was not remembering this stuff at all. Ultimately, I ended up getting fired from that job because I couldn't keep track of anything. You don't want a project manager in a position that can't remember what they said. And now I have ways of dealing with that, and I'm really good at that type of job. But at the time, I didn't have the tool set to figure that stuff out, or even deal with the reality that I was completely forgetting things. So the strategy there was record the conversations and go back and listen for specific things and see what's going on. That all became very telling. I started to take the discovery process for what was wrong with me a lot more serious. All right, so let's do a quick recap. Number 4 was numbness. Number 3, back spasms. Number 2, heat intolerance and fatigue. And number 1, cognition, cognitive issues, and what was being masked as ADHD, like I said, which probably had some of that element in there, but ultimately, my brain was working double time and I was only getting 25% of the performance. So there you go. I hope you found this helpful. Comment below and leave a symptom that you think is very important that you had before you knew you had MS. And maybe someone will see it and think, oh yeah, maybe that will be their light bulb moment. Share and like if you found this valuable, because my idea is that we're going to grow a nice little community here where we share information, because the way we beat this beast of MS is to not go silently into the night and to share everything we know about our condition. I'm Cliff, I have MS, and I'm out.